This screencast has to do with the Stanford Prison Experiment. And this experiment was done by Philip Zimbardo. He's the guy down in the lower right hand corner. This is one of the classic experiments in psych history. It was very much looked at as an experiment that started out okay and went very bad very quickly. So um, let's kind of go through the background real quick. Philip Zimbardo wanted to set up a mock or an imaginary, so to speak, a pretend prison. And he did so at Stanford University. That's where he teaches. And so they kind of converted this hallway and this area that they didn't use very much into a mock prison. They got volunteers, 24 males, that volunteered with the idea that they were going to get paid $15 a day. And this was back in 1971. They volunteered for the 2 week long experiment, and then they were randomly selected. I'm sorry, they were randomly assigned into the roles of either a prisoner or a prison guard. There were 12 prisoners, 12 prison guards, and they basically started a role play. Now, the idea that Zimbardo had, he wanted to go through a 2 week long study and see what kind of effects, how did acting out a certain role affect a person's behavior? Were there any kind of particular effects that were occurring with the prisoners and or the guards and so forth? So again, kind of an interesting look at social psychology, how other people being around us and the role we play maybe within a group of individuals, how that impacts our behavior. Now, as I said, the experiment started out, and I think it really caught many of the guards, or not many of the prisoners, rather, kind of by surprise, because literally the prisoners were told to stay at home on a certain day and that they would be contacted in terms of getting them to Stanford and beginning the experiment. Well, the way they contacted him was Philip Zimbardo actually had real policemen from that area of California that went out and arrested these people from their homes. They went in, they did not tell them what they were being charged with, they just told them that they were taking them downtown. They handcuffed the people, they took them out in front of their families, in front of neighbors. None of these people had any clue what was going on. And basically, the men were then taken down to the prison. They were stripped down, they were hosed off, and basically given a little robe that they wore, as that was their prison gown. And they were given a number, just like you would be if you were in an actual prison. So I think that probably shocked a lot of the prisoners, because it kind of set the tone very early that this is a very real life type deal. The guards were given instructions that they were not allowed to physically abuse the prisoners, but they could come up with creative ways, as Zimbardo said, to try and make the prisoners behave, make them mind, and so forth. And so things got going there. Now, this prison study was supposed to last 2 weeks. It never made it. It actually had to be stopped after 6 days. The situation just got out of hand. The prisoners were literally being mentally abused in a variety of ways. Everybody got kind of caught up in this whole thing. The guards, there were a few guards that were kind of friendly with the prisoners and would give them little benefits, as long as nobody was really looking. But there were a few guards, and one in particular that was extremely mean, and they were very creative at coming up with ways to put down and kind of ostracize the prisoners. So finally, this had gone on, quite to quite some degree, and they had one or two people try to literally quit, and one person actually did for sure quit the experiment. One of the prisoners at one point, because the stress was just too much. They just couldn't handle what was going on. The prisoners and the guards both literally got into this role playing, and what eventually took over was they started playing the role, and they literally lost touch of who they were. That, and what we call that is de-individuation. They de-individuated. In other words, the the prisoners lost their sense of identity. They started referring to themselves by number. They were never told to do that, but they did it. I mean, they just started referring to themselves by number as opposed to by their name. Um, they totally lost any ability or belief that they could control their situation. They were really and truly in a situation where they thought they had no control whatsoever, and the guards really kind of lost track of what they were doing, and some of them admitted later that they were kind of being creative with the ways that they kind of tortured the prisoners, and that they really probably shouldn't have done that, but they got caught up in the role. Philip Zimbardo himself, even he got lost in the experiment. He was acting as the prison superintendent. Well, the superintendent oversees what's going on, and should have been aware of what was taking place, but he admitted later that it wasn't until day 6 when he was looking over some of the video of what was going on, and he actually had a grad student with him. And the grad student was looking at what was taking place, and the grad student basically told him, said, "I cannot believe what you're doing to these young men." And he said it wasn't until then that it really hit him. And then he looked and he realized, wow, we really have gone too far here. And they ended up stopping the experiment, and debriefing all of the people involved and so forth. But kind of interesting in how all that happened. Um, but it kind of signifies, if you look at, like, what's the meaning of the prison experiment today, to us. If you think about it, people get lost in the roles that they play, whether it be that they're a worker, or they're a boss, or they're sometimes they're a parent, a child, a student, a teacher, whatever it is. People tend to sometimes get lost in those roles. They get caught up in those roles to the point where they start playing the role without really critically analyzing sometimes what they're doing. They act as if they think they are supposed to do a certain thing. They kind of lose their own sense of identity. They de-individuate, and and the expected behavior, or at least what they perceive to be the expected behavior of that role, is what they tend to take on. And sometimes they get caught up in it. They get lost. Um, it's kind of interesting because that type of, like, abuse, there was no physical abuse in Zimbardo's prison, but there was a lot of mental abuse. And if you think about it, all that occurred within 6 days. Think about how real life prisons are run, and how they have people out there. It's not an easy situation, and depending on how much leeway or how much freedom that the guards have, it can be a really nightmare of a place for many prisoners, depending on the situation. But if you think about the violence and the cruelty that can sometimes take place in prisons today. Now, one other thing I want to mention here on Philip Zimbardo. Um, One of the things that people asked out after this experiment was, how was it that these good, generally speaking, good people got caught up in this experiment and ended up doing some really bad things and really hurting other people. And Zimbardo, he wrote a book and he refers to this whole effect as the Lucifer effect. In other words, Zimbardo believes, that each and every person, each and every one of us, has kind of an evil or a bad side to us, and that given the right circumstances, if we're playing the right role, if we're around the right people, if the situation is just right, that dark side of us can come out. Um, it's kind of interesting, but he wrote a book on it. It's an interesting concept, the Lucifer effect, that each and every person has that ability to be kind of a devil, if you would, deep down within us.